Three, two, one, and happy Wine Wednesday, everyone. Hope you're having a fabulous Wednesday and all of your seahorses are doing fabulously, along with you. Um, Ray's already with me because he's such a trooper. He always comes. And today, guys, if you have any seahorse questions, Ray's actually taking care of a seahorse question on Reef to Reef as we speak. He might want to tell us about that in a minute. But if you have any questions as we're live or even afterwards, feel free to ask in the comments or join via the link that I provide for Hangouts in the comment section. Also, what I thought we'd do today is chit chat as always. We always have such a fabulous time. Um, Drinking on my Merlot. I went back to my staple. But I thought we'd also go over some of the questions that we get on the SWS on YouTube and on Facebook because there's a lot of times that I don't get to them. So I thought we'd cover that today. And just as a recap of last week, I'll tell you, I see a lot of posts and everything about mothers and how this quarantine is not, many people are saying, oh, I'm so bored. Oh, I'm going crazy of boredom. What, there's nothing to do, blah, blah, blah. But for mothers, it's like now we are stuck with the kids 24/7, which means there's no time to do anything. So my kids actually just started their online schooling today because they were on spring break for the past 2 weeks. And so now they're doing schooling online. So my day is filled with learning stuff that I learned years ago and forgotten. But anyhow, I do eventually see your questions. So we will cover some of them today. As you'll get anybody new, we're very casual, laid back. So if you have questions, shout them out in the comments or feel free to join. Okay, so Ray, how are you doing?
Oh, a little sore.
Sore.
I was supposed to clean the tank out 2 days ago, the one tank with the barbs in it 2 days ago, and the back pain has been too bad. I haven't been able
Mm.
to do it. So I'm getting a little bit worried on that.
Oh no. Is this a new thing or just
Oh no, it's
yeah?
uh, like I've had problems since 1976,
Mm,
but
jeez.
I broke my back at that time. But since then, I have degenerative disc disease, and it's eaten away so that I've lost over 4 inches in height. They can't even put an epidural in anymore for when I need a knee operation.
Oh my gosh. Well,
But
you're really scaring me because I have the same thing, the degenerative. I think they told me mine was degenerative spine. But anyways, I probably have it wrong. So, anyways, I hate hearing that you're not not doing very well. Um,
well, it's the seahorses that are paying the price at the moment. I
yeah.
just worry about that because once I get over 10 days without doing my cleaning and water change, that's when I run into problems.
And is this the tank with the scrubber on it? That
Yeah,
was okay. And
right.
have you often gone beyond 10 days? Like I'm just wondering how that would affect, like if the scrubber would start growing, or if it just starts
I
growing on the
didn't have a
glass.
cover on it at that time, but I went, I forget now, 12 or 13 days, and it would be 13 tomorrow. But I ended up at that time with an infection, and I used the last of my Furan 2 to take care of it. So now I don't have any left. I can't afford to get any
Oh
infection
no.
anymore because you can't buy anything here in Canada.
Right. Oh man, that's just the worst. Honestly, a lot of those medications you can't get here anymore either, but I know it's a lot harder there. So, oh, that sucks. Um, I got nothing. I'm just sorry to hear that things are sucking so badly.
Hopefully tomorrow I'll be well enough to do it. Like I don't have to be back to normal state, just as long as I'm okay to get it done.
Sure. That's the really great thing
For me,
about.
it's a bigger task because I do complete cleaning, and I change 90 to 95% of the water.
Hmm. Yeah, for anybody new who hasn't heard us talk before, Ray does the real deal, as he just mentioned. He really does a water change seriously. Hey, I'm curious, when you do the 90 to 95% of the water, do the seahorses just stay towards the bottom, I guess, or?
Yep, they'll
eh,
stay in the bottom of the tank. I drain the tank, and while the sump pump is running, so it pumps the water out of the sump up into the top. And once I'm drained down past the overflow, then I'll turn off that return pump,
Mm-hmm.
and then I have a hose hooked up to my supply in the basement, and I turn that on. So while I'm still draining more out, I'm at least filling the sump up in the meantime.
Gotcha.
Then I shut off when it gets at the top of the sump. I shut it off and wait till I get done all my cleaning and everything. And um
It
once
works
the cleaning
out.
is done, I turn the pump back on, and then also turn the downstairs pump pumping up,
Yep.
and just leave it on until it gets up. But the biggest amount of work is setting it all up and
Sure.
taking it all down. But standing there cleaning the tank, it's not easy with a spine problem.
No kidding. I mean, hats off to you for doing it. And your seahorses are obviously used to it. You've been doing this for a long time with a lot of success, and they're just used to it. But like the very first time, if you can remember back, that you used this method on this tank when the seahorses were kind of new, would they like? I just have had a lot of questions about doing those large water changes, whether or not.
Very first time I used to take the seahorses out, put them in a pail.
Yep. I was gonna say they don't seem to get spooked in my opinion. So I just thought I'd make
I
that point.
have the other problem. They get too curious and they come up to the hose that I have drain in it.
Yep, trying to get. Yep, I know Tom Hornsby has told a few stories about during cleaning the seahorses ending up in the places they weren't supposed to be because they got too curious. So absolutely, but still, it's a good method, and I hope that you feel well enough to do it because those seahorses are really great. Do you
Well,
want to?
see, a lot of people wouldn't like to be doing big water changes and clean out every 10 days like that, but
Right.
setups are very cheap, very simple. I have a standard tank that you buy. I think in the States there they advertise $1 a gallon.
Mm-hmm.
40-gallon tanks, $40.
Right.
Um, this one doesn't have a skimmer on it. The 90-gallon with the abs in it, it has a big skimmer,
Sure.
but it's a homemade skimmer. So I don't spend money on my systems. I spend the money on the seahorses, and that's it.
Yeah. If
And
you're willing to do the work, then that's, definitely the way to go. Go
well,
on.
see, the salt water is fairly inexpensive to me because half of it is my own formula that I mix up, and I mix it half and half with Instant Ocean.
Hmm.
So it's not like I'm paying a premium price. And on top of that, like I buy 12 cases of Instant Ocean at a time, so that I get a decreased price because of that.
Now, I'm curious, one thing as you were talking, I was just thinking because I kind of went the other way. I try to automate as much as I can. I try to get, equipment to do the work for me. First of all, I'm kind of a little teeny bit lazy and I don't like doing the water changes, but also, I would if that was the only alternative. But when I get the equipment and this, that, and the other, it does make it less expensive for me. But one of the biggest costs that I've always had is running RO water. Is your water just like when you make your water, are you using RO or is your water just good?
ROVI,
Really?
yeah, I don't,
Okay. Do you have a
yeah.
really good system or something? Because with mine, my water is so bad that I had to replace filters and replace the entire unit so often it got really expensive. I'm just curious.
You had to replace the unit itself or just the cartridges.
I had in the time that I was doing tons of water changes when I first started. I'd have to replace the filters constantly, especially the what it DI the whatever the
Well, that's
last
all
one is.
depends on your water supply.
Right, and my water's terrible. Right, that's absolutely. We don't drink it either. So
What part of the country do you live in?
what?
What part of the country do you live in?
We live in Indiana, right smack dab in the middle of
I have pipelines from the Great Lakes.
I really don't know. I just know that I had our water tested once, and there was like arsenic and stuff in it. It was just absolutely terrible. Um, So I don't know the reasoning, but I just know that the water's really hard here. It's really not drinkable or usable, and so I'd constantly have to. Whoops, sorry. Constantly have to replace that the filters, and then I must maybe I got a cheap system. I don't know. I always had the portable ones that I could just hook up to my faucet or my hose, and I think once or at least once, probably more like twice, I had to replace the entire thing because something it would get cracked, like valves or something would get cracked. I don't know. They just said it had to be replaced. So I don't know. That just got
Years ago, I used a tap water hookup thing, but it was just a deionizer. And it's
uh,
just a single cartridge. But then after I got a few cartridges, then I regenerated them and kept doing it that way because it was just DI. And even at our good water quality here, it was expensive to replace those
oh
cartridges.
yeah.
So once I got a bunch of cartridges on hand there, then I just regenerated the ions.
Right,
Um,
and that's the other thing I didn't do is I wasn't smart enough to get the kind you could regenerate. Suppose maybe you can all of them, but I would buy the complete port. I don't know. I just made mistakes, but anyhow,
I don't keep track of how long this one. This I've had this one for many years now. It's a Spectrapure,
hmm.
and I don't think there's any better. There's probably others maybe as good, but there's none that are better.
Well, I did see.
I go quite a while with the cartridges. I
I,
never actually recorded, but
Well,
um,
I'm sure your system is probably a lot better than mine because I would, I'm always looking for the deal. I admit it. And so I would get I think mine was from like Pure Water Club or something. It wasn't even like a name brand in the aquarium industry. It worked for me. I just had to replace a lot. Hey, I see Dan just joined. Dan, how are you?
I'm going to hang in here as long as I can.
Oh, you don't sound so good. You okay?
No, I relapse.
You relapsed. You're scaring me. Relapsed? Not
Yeah, well, yeah.
you're not feeling good again? Oh no. Oh my gosh, what happened? You just woke up feeling crappy?
I woke up with the sweats, the chills, some nausea, pressing headache, uh, balance issues, shortness of breath. The whole shit again.
Oh my
Oops, excuse me.
gosh. No, you're okay. Um, are you gonna try to go to the hospital or?
No, I spent some time on the phone with the VA, and I don't meet the criteria.
Oh my gosh.
You know, be nice to know. I mean, it's kind of weird that 2 weeks later or 10 days, whatever it is, I come back with the same symptoms again.
Right. Man. I'm so sorry to hear. I think Kevin just joined. Hello, or someone just joined. Hello to whoever just joined. But feel free to pipe up if you have a question, comment, or want us to talk about anything. But Dan, yeah, that I can't even believe it that they still haven't gotten to a point where they're able to test everyone, or still telling people they can't come in. It's just crazy to me.
Well, they're not saying I can't come in. What they're telling me is they're not going to see me under normal circumstances, and that if I feel it's that urgent, to go to the ER.
Okay. Oh, because you would typically go to like for me a family doctor, for you the VA, but they're saying go to the ER. Well, will you go if it gets that bad though, I hope?
Well, if it gets that bad, yeah. I
Okay.
mean, but um, what? It's kind of hard to, sometimes it's difficult to determine how bad is bad.
Right. And with this,
You know,
it hits so quickly and it's like within an hour you're worse. Has it gotten progressively worse this time?
well, it's kind of weird because throughout the day, early, I started doing the zinc again, and um, each time I take do a zinc, which is they're about 11 milligrams, and a couple hours later, I feel progressively better, and I keep doing that about every 3 hours. But you max out; you're not supposed to do more than 40 or 50 milligrams.
Right.
So, um, by the end of doing the zinc every 2 or 3 hours, you feel pretty good. But then when you stop doing it, within 2 or 3 hours, um, beyond that time you would have taken it, you just start sliding downhill again.
Right. Oh, ding dong to somebody. Um,
What's going on here?
okay. Anyways, well, gosh, well, you have me worried now. Um,
Well, I mean, it's good. Write it out and see, you know.
right.
Um, but I thought I'd come in case there's any questions, and if we can get those done early, I don't know how long I'll hang, but I'll hang for a while.
No, that's fine. In fact, that's what I was going to do today is cover some questions that I've gotten on the website and on the videos that hadn't had a chance to answer. But Ray, really quickly, do you want to tell me what you ran into on Reef to Reef? Maybe Dan can give an opinion too.
Oh, there was a fellow that wanted information on putting seahorses in the 25-gallon cube refugium that he had hooked up to his, I'm assuming, reef system. And so I explained the reasons that, as I saw it, that it wasn't a good idea. And then he posted back the query, which I haven't replied to yet. I'm in the midst of it. But just he posted back a question, well, would it be the same for dwarf seahorses? But basically, I have to explain to him that with a 25-gallon cube, you're going to have to use a hell of a lot of enriched brine to be able to get the food density that they need in there. Plus, you got to make sure with the water flow and that you got protective covering a lot more so than with standard seahorses. But it, um,
I,
I don't understand why there's so many people that just plain come out and ask, can I do this or what do I need to do or something, rather than do research first and then ask questions that aren't answered through the research. Maybe it's just because I'm different or something. I don't know, but uh, like even with people around here that I sold seahorses to, I didn't come across that. It was already somebody did research to find out first before they came to me to get the seahorses. Um, or one guy asked me where to find the best information he was looking for, but I didn't have so many that I like I see on the forums or posting on Facebook queries about what they need to do or is this okay or that okay um, before they do any research.
Well, one of the things that I would say, honestly, is that so many people do something that doesn't end up working out and post it and show that they're doing it, and then they disappear. So no one knows that it didn't work out, and that picture's there forever, or that post is there forever. So people think that they can do it. That's why getting good information out there is so important. Hey, Dan, I'm curious, how many people who've added seahorses to refugiums has it worked out? And what's your take on 25-gallon refugium?
Well, we really don't know because we really don't have any true statistics to be able to say. But from an observation standpoint, both as one who sells them and one who's participated in multiple platforms of dealing with people, I would say the percentage is pretty small. You know, when somebody, I get this over the phone sometimes, and it's usually real easy to deal with over the phone. It's much more difficult on a forum because you don't have voice inflection, you don't have the tone, and the other things that where you can say certain things and basically put it to bed rather quickly. When I'm asked on the phone this, my first answer is when they ask, can it be done? I say it can be done, but your odds of success are probably in the very, very, very low percentages. And is it worth losing that amount of money? Are you willing to let the seahorses die and lose the money for that to try the experiment?
Right.
And for a lot of people, that's enough for them to end it right there. And then they'll come back and say, well, what's the problem? And the first issue, of course, is temperature. Um, the second is the space itself. How is it designed and what's the flow like? And then, what else is going to be in there? For the dwarfs, my first thing I'd say to them is, can you make the partition about 5 gallons instead of 25? And can you stop the flow for intermittently for 3 and 4 hours at a time so they can feed?
Mm-hmm.
And right there, that's going to be enough of a headache that most reefers are going to say, well, I ain't going to do that crap.
Right.
Um, but, I do know, you have to be careful when you say no, you can't do this, because I
Right.
had a customer down towards Miami that asked to put him in his sump and or his refugium, I should say. He asked if he could put some in there, and I came up with the same, typical reply. And he said, "Well, these guys have, it's literally their own tank." And I said, "Well, what kind of tank are we talking about?" And he goes, "Well, it's a 120-gallon refugium.
Right.
This was to a 350-gallon tank. So,
Right.
it's a little bit of a different ball game. I mean, that refugium looked like a macroalgae forest.
Actually,
Um,
Edson came on Wine Wednesday a couple of times, and I had advised him to not keep the seahorses in the refugium. And then when we saw his refugium was as big as his aquarium, they
right,
loved it down
right,
there, So,
right. So
right,
you have to have all the information, but here we do have enough information that's 25 gallon.
right,
And normally I don't recommend a 25 gallon, but when I look at it as being part of a system that is much higher in volume, the 25 gallons in itself doesn't scare me, depending upon how it's configured. If we're talking 25 gallons at 6 inches tall, or 25 gallons that's 6 inches wide, I'm probably not in favor of it. But um, my biggest concern in that type of a setting is the first one is the
temperature.
temperature.
Hmm.
And then the second argument that I have here for most people is, a lot of times refugiums are not where they're being observed, and it's kind of a waste to put that type of an exotic animal where they're not being observed closely.
Right. Yeah, like my refugiums usually are a mess. I wouldn't want, to. It might the seahorses might do well down there, but I wouldn't want to put them down there. Okay. So I'm sure Ray will handle that question. I just thought we'd cover it here too. I'm sure that everything he said is right on, absolutely. And and if you were looking at someone who hadn't, they were in the position. Another way that someone might not have done the research prior is if they already have a big reef tank set up and then they want seahorses but are trying to make it into one system. I could see that being a case where, they hadn't researched seahorses because they didn't know they were going to do it. So, anyways, either way, if someone had a 25-gallon refugium that was more displayed, the temperature worked out because they weren't keeping hard corals that needed really high temps, blah, blah, blah. If everything worked out, you would still say keep one or two like erectus versus dwarfs, right, Dan? Is that correct?
Yeah, I would keep the population to a minimum.
Gotcha. Okay.
But then
Hey, a
to
quick
the
question.
temperature, I would be concerned also that normal reef tank, the water quality is not as good as what a seahorse tank is normally maintained at to be successful. And so I think he could run into problems there. There's also a possibility that exposure to pathogens that are in the system from the other tank inhabitants could play a role too in the problems.
But I agree with all of that, Ray. But the key to remember is that when you're dealing with the average Joe that clearly doesn't know a lot about seahorses, is that if you just come off with an immediate negative answer, they have a tendency to say, that person's just dead set against it. They're not open minded. And when you tell them that, yeah, it can be done, but are you willing to do what's necessary for it to work? Then you get a different attitude from them.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Another.
Uh,
Go ahead, Dan. You
quick,
had a question. Sorry.
yeah, I'm on a different computer. I'm in the bedroom on my other computer, which I don't use for this very often, or haven't used. And in the chat section, it doesn't let me type. It says create a channel to join the chat. What the hell is that?
Uh oh. I don't know. Where are you looking at?
Pretty
I'm
on.
looking at the live chat on. I'm on Chrome on YouTube, and after I signed in, it says create a channel to join the chat. It's when I move the mouse away, it says say something where like it does on the other computer where you type, but it doesn't let me.
I honestly have no idea. Anybody in the audience have a clue?
I'm
Because
just looking at it right now, and it just says, "Welcome to live chat. Remember to guard your privacy and abide by community guidelines." And then learn more. But I'm there is something tickling in the back of my mind that when you started this and when I first started going on it,
You couldn't.
I had the same situation come up, but I don't remember what I did about it now.
My ultimate guess right away, Dan, is that it's because um, when trying to keep it a very simple explanation, when I put the chat into the stream so people can see it afterwards, via putting it up here, I don't think it's actually like the live chat. That doesn't really answer your question. I'm not really sure. The only thing I could say personally is grab your phone and go to Facebook or go to YouTube. That's if you're able to do that, because that's kind of what I do because it's so hard to jump around. I'm sorry.
Gotcha.
I don't know
Okay.
why it's doing that. If anyone else is having problems, please let me know. And for now, Dan, if you're able, just you know, answer, I guess, in here. We'll try to fix it figure it out by next week. Sorry, and hopefully you're better then. Um, and if anybody else but when you do pull it up on your phone or whatever, turn down the volume because I always make that mistake. All right. Hey, a kind of curious question I got recently online was, um, do different species have different feeding needs? Specifically, the question was, this person was wanting tiger tail seahorses and wanted to know if feeding would be different. Dan, any thoughts on that? Because like
Well,
the smaller,
the food's basically the same, um, but the feeding habits of the tiger tails can be a little bit different than some of the others. Where I run into problems is when people have erectus and then get something like tiger tails, they're not necessarily as aggressive of a feeder, and they have a propensity to be more active in the early morning hours and the late evening hours. So um, that's going to be a little bit different. But otherwise, they would eat the same food, and everything else would apply the same.
so same food, but they eat at different times. They're not as aggressive of eaters, so you might have to make sure they're eating if you have other seahorses. And yeah, just watching the times. Now, obviously, dwarf seahorses have completely different feeding schedules. So I think that was kind of the question. And I've never personally kept tiger tails. That's the one that I wish I could, but they seem kind of like along the lines of Barbori, very picky. And I could be wrong. Cheryl loves them and is great with them,
Barbs
but
are easier.
huh?
I think barbs are easier.
I think you're crazy,
Some
but
people seemed like they were too close to what dwarfs were. They'd rather sit perched, wait the food come to them.
yes, I'm not used to that. I was used to Erectus who chomp, chomp, chomp. It would make me crazy. I'd be like, that seahorse, it's fat. The food is right there. I want to eat it. But I learned how to deal with it. But anyway, so I just wanted to make sure, Dan, that at any size of these seahorses, they all, by the time they're sold, they should be weaned onto frozen and they all eat frozen mysis, right? And need variety, of course. That's the
Yeah.
overall. Okay. And if you guys have any questions that you want to cover too, go ahead. I was just going to try to get some out before Dan has to go. Let's see. I get a lot of really hateful messages too. I guess we're doing something right, guys. Good deal. Okay. And I do get a lot of questions still. Dan, are you still selling, or should we direct folks mainly to Seahorse Savvy at this point?
I am still selling, but I'm gonna hold before I do any shipping until things settle down.
Hmm.
Um, right now, we go on lockdown effective tomorrow,
Oh,
um, statewide lockdown, and for me to ship seahorses, I have to drive 45 minutes to FedEx to drop them off, which means I have to violate the lockdown. Um,
I didn't even realize Florida was going on lockdown.
yeah, it
I'm
came out
sorry.
a couple hours.
It
Yeah, it
is
was a couple of hours ago.
And what does this
Um,
actually mean? Like you can't leave your house?
well, it means that unless you're going out for something essential, that you're not to leave your house.
Wow. I mean, I guess we're
So
under the same thing because until Sean's work did layoffs, he had to have a letter to drive around to work.
right. Well, I working in a feed store, I'm considered essential job because we have food for animals.
Right.
But um, short of that, I mean, the grocery stores are open. You can go buy groceries, and you can still get gas. But your regular, you're not gonna be able to go furniture shopping or other things. And people around here are just so stupid. I mean, I've had two or three people that got real upset with us because we weren't open and they wanted to go in and browse. And I said, look, we're closed. We'll bring the stuff out to you, but we don't allow people in the store. And he goes, well, that's ridiculous. I'm bored. I just want to go around and do a little bit of browsing because I'm so damn bored. And the guy's standing there coughing. It's like, get out of here.
Right. Oh my
Okay,
gosh.
we got them up here in Canada too.
And I'm not going to go out and say people are stupid because I don't get to. I don't need 20 more hate comments down here. But anyways, yeah, people please just it is hard. It's even harder when you're not bored and you've got kids at home going crazy, driving you crazy. But we just got to get through this. I tell my girls every single day, don't complain about bored. Go in your bedroom, pray for the people who are dying. I mean, come on, Jeez. It's we got to think of the people that, like matter. Okay. Anyways, don't want to go down that road again. Um okay, another question, Ray or Dan, have either one of you ever kept a seahorse aquarium that uses a hang-on filter?
When I first started, I used the AquaClear,
Okay.
uh, but I didn't put any media or anything in it. I was using it just as a water mover.
That was the question, and it's not just for hang on back. I just wanted to make sure we covered both sides of the coin. So people have asked, what's the best media to use either in the filter or in the sump for a seahorse tank?
I prefer not to use any because it was just going to trap the crap in there, and which means, like in my case, I have what's called quick filters that I put on my power heads that trap the stuff, and they're easy to clean. And I clean them twice a week, which I think is a minimum, and that's okay. But with the AquaClear to pull that basket out and clean it and then stick it all back in again, it just wasn't worth it to me. So I just did without.
So in other words, just to recap, Ray's method when, in that kind of situation would be to use the pre-filters. I know you've talked about that many times, that are easily cleaned and just not really doing the bacteria part of it. And then he does massive water changes. Dan, what's your 2 cents on media for a
Well,
seahorse tank?
I don't know that a specific media is necessarily, has to be a specific one. It's a matter of what's available to you, what you can afford, what you can set up.
Mm-hmm.
As far as media for, you talk about media for catching stuff or media for um, biological filtration.
It wasn't specified, and that's what I was hoping. I was
Okay.
waiting for you to
You just need to
say
have
you just got to have
Okay.
something for both.
Right. Right. So for biological media is often different than mechanical filtration media. Now, sometimes it can be the same, and if they're the same, that can be problematic because every time you clean it, you run the risk of destroying your biological media.
Right.
So, I, in my systems, being a commercial systems, I use the K1 filter. Um, what do you call it? The little biosphere media
Mm-hmm.
is my preferred method. But there's different types of blocks, and people use rubble, rock, etc. Any of those can be used for biological. For catching a mechanical filtration, my preference is to use a sump. I like using a 100 micron filter sock as my first filter, and then I have my protein filter, which acts as a mechanical filter, and then I have a 5 micron cartridge filter that polishes the water off going back to the tank. Now, prior to that, I was successful using multiple layers of blue bonded media on top of a basket on top of bio balls, and then going polishing it with a cartridge filter. But the filter sock is much easier in terms of keeping clean and changing out.
And I know there was an article on FuseJaw. Is that article that shows your kind of the basics of your method on Seahorse Sources group now in the files?
I'm
Or
sorry.
I remember on FuseJaw, there
Yeah.
was an article that kind of showed the basic mechanics of your. I think it was for fry, but it
Yes.
showed the
Yes.
sump, and that's on
The,
Seahorse Sources group now.
Yeah, it's the basic concept of how I do it. But the same thing is in my videos on how to breed, as well as even the one on how to set up a tank. There's one that I did for the one of the clubs down in Miami that's on the YouTube channel too.
Nice. Okay, so you guys check those out. I'll try to link them afterwards. Hey, forgive me if I mispronounce, but Sigurd the Stout, fabulous name, and thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. We appreciate you. Robs, you know I love you, and we can't wait to see when you're keeping seahorses in your refugium, because if you anyone can do it, it's you, and we can't wait to see. All right, next question. Oh, I'm sorry. To recap what Dan was saying, basically just make sure you have something that works well for biological, and then make sure you have something well that works for mechanical. And that's what I say in the how to do seahorses video. And he helped me with that, by the way, guys, a long time ago. Not the footage, that's all me, but the facts. Anyways, with me, I just want to add, in my case, I'm not commercial. I'm kind of small time, but I just like sumps better. And when I do a very small aquarium with a hob filter, I use a ton of like floss. Floss just works really well for me. It's cheap. It's media that I can pull out and toss. And that's usually my mechanical filtration if I'm using a hob. If I'm using a refugium or sump, I use the sock like Dan described. Um, and then I'm just a stickler for putting a skimmer on every single seahorse tank. I kind of, on the smaller tanks with the hob, sometimes I can't pull that off. And I've been testing out and trying the hang on back hobs, and they just don't usually, I haven't found one that works for me yet, but so in that case, I would just do more water changes and etc. The other thing that I use that no one's mentioned yet is macroalgae. And that is my number one thing that I use in almost every aquarium, unless it's quarantine, fry, grow out, or whatever. But for a display tank, I always use macros, whether I'm talking about a scrubber in the sump, or a refugium in the sump, or macros in the display. I use macros in some way as filtration and pretty and etc. So, and I plan next week, guys, to try to talk more about macros, because I've gotten a lot of questions about macros, but I wanted to have pictures to show what I'm talking about while we're talking. So I'll stop talking now. All right. If nobody else has a question ready, another one from Nick Drops. I'm sorry, guys, I can't do these names. Um, how do you control flow? They had watched my seahorse tank video, and they wanted to know how we say, oh, get a filter, oh, get a power head, but to actually like lay it out. Can anybody give a good demonstration explanation of how to control flow? Is it with the filter? Is it with the pump? I'm so confused. Dan?
Well, it can be done with any of them. I mean, there's so many crazy ways of doing things. Um, I try to keep it as simple as possible. On my a lot of my tanks, I'm able to use a single pump, and then I'll create tees somewhere along the line to break up the flow. I've seen people set up some pretty elaborate spray bars that they've self-made. I've seen people buy spray bars. Um, I've never had to use a power head in a tank, so I don't have really much input I can put there. Ray is probably better at answering that. Um, but some of the hang on the back filters, some of them you can control the flow. When I first started, I used a lot of the Emperor filters, and I was using the Emperor 400s, and they had a little thing on the back where I could, you know, slow down the flow if so desired. But I never found them to be too much flow. And generally speaking, most hang on the back filters aren't going to give you too much flow. You can also use airlines to assist with it too. Um, I think it's a part of the fun part of the hobby is the fact that there is no one way of doing things,
Right.
and there's so many variables and so many ways to do things, and you're limited to your own creativity. So it's a matter of experimentation to find what works.
Good answers. And I know I'm gonna mention something. Ray, did you have any thoughts? Want to say anything about that?
Actually, I missed the first part
Just,
until Dan said something about I
Well,
might.
before you answer, tell him, Kelly,
yeah,
Rob's point is a very good one,
please.
and I should have something I should have mentioned in there is that he says the correct amount of flow is to control the detritus from settling on the bottom and the right amount to turn over to handle the mechanical filtration. And I
Very
agree
good.
with that because you want to keep the stuff from settling and becoming gooky on the bottom. And if you can keep it suspended in the water column until the filter removes it, then assuming you have good mechanical filtration, then you have the correct amount of flow.
Absolutely perfect answer. Always can count on Rob's.
For
um,
me, I have multiple power heads of the same type, and it's because I've had these power heads for decades. There's not much point in going out and buying some newfangled thing when I have these things. Didn't cost much then. I think even now they're not expensive, but they pump 400 gallons an hour. Um, and for instance, in this 40-gallon tall, I've got one, two, three. I've got four of them in this 40-gallon tall, and one has the quick filter on it, and the only other filtration on there is the mechanical filtration. That is the stock. Um, but and one of the power heads lies right on the bottom behind the corals, and I have deflected. I've made up a deflector to put on the output of it, so water squirts out the sides as well as allowing a little bit go out direct. Um, and that I put on a timer so that it comes on when I feed,
yeah,
and so it helps to keep the food in suspension at that point. And then when the power head with the quick filter comes back on again afterwards to get out any remaining crap, then this one will kick on again at that time, and again stir up the stuff on the bottom.
sure.
And without that, the rest of the power heads are on 24/7.
Gotcha. In my answer very quickly, because I know we want to get Dan's advice on lots of stuff, and so I'll hurry. When I made the video, I literally had so many different systems because I was experimenting with them. So I had, 50 or 60 and 90 gallon tanks with refugiums, with scrubbers, with sumps, blah, blah, blah. And then I had, 30 gallons in the bedroom, one with, oh my gosh, what's it called? What canister filter, which I don't recommend, just my personal opinion. But I had one with a canister filter, a bunch with hobs, a bunch of smaller tanks with hobs. And so when I was doing the video, I was trying to cover the many different ways that you can do it. So very quickly, when I have any kind of sump situation, I use the pump in the sump to do the surface agitation. I use the return to create my surface agitation, and then I use 1 to 2 RW4s, or eights, depending on how big the tank is, and I typically position them. I'm trying to show this. I typically position one near the back, pointed up, to get all that gunk and the dead spots as we've been talking about, and then one at the side, kind of not directly hitting seahorses, but kind of pointed. I have to mess with it to get it. It takes me forever. But I have videos, many videos of seahorses flow dancing, and one of the main points I want to make is that seahorses don't need low flow. They like all this flow. In fact, they sleep on power heads, and you have to make sure you cover them so their tails are protected, but they sleep on them to keep their faces in the flow. They love it. Think about it, they're from an ocean. Anyways, and then in the canister filter situation, because it had the spray bar, doing all the surface and circulation, it was a very, very good canister filter. So it really circulated all the tank. It was a taller tank, taller 30. And then I just had one power head in that tank at the bottom, covered, make sure their tails are safe. And you couldn't even see it because it was behind the rocks, and it just literally swept along the floor at kind of an upward angle to get the detritus. So, all right, there's my supposed to be short but long answer. All right. Okay,
All
Dan, go
right.
ahead.
Fashion Girl was asking a question about mixing seahorses with kudas and mixing species, as if I understand correctly. And The reason that we don't mix species is that what we've learned over the years is that quite often when we put mix different species together, we end up with one or more with some type of a strange bacterial issue. And we don't have any studies to explain what happens. The theory is that the first of all, seahorses have a very strange immune system, and they lack the gut associated uh, lymphoid tissue that most fish have, and that is supposed to be largely responsible for adaptive immunity. We do know that seahorses have adaptive immunity, but it seems to be slow reacting. And what we believe happens is that the gut flora of the seahorses is different. And in virtually all animals, we have both good and bad bacteria in our guts. And the bad flora in one seahorse's gut makes the other seahorse become sick, and the pathologic gene gets turned on, and then you can end up losing one or two or all of the animals in the tank. What we've learned over time is that you can mix erectus with reedi generally without problems. Not always, but in most cases, people are successful. But when we start mixing other species together, we do see, not everybody, we do see a high incidence of issues. And there are people who have done it successfully, but if you look on the forums and the message boards and Facebook, etc., you'll see where there's a lot of people have had issues. And I can't tell you if it's, 50-50, 90-20, 90-10, or, what the actual real statistics are. I can just tell you that it happens often when you mix different species.
And I just want to add that there's a simple fix for this problem. Of course, you want new species. Who doesn't? You got to have them all, right? I planned and hope to someday accomplish, but if you do it first, I'd love to see it. A wall of seahorse aquariums, different species. All you got to do is set up another tank, right? I mean, hey, that's my answer. Set up another tank. You don't have to mix them. All right, Ray, were you going to say anything?
No, other than the fact that that's why I have so many tanks.
Right, to separate tank for different species, especially in
Yeah.
your case because you're keeping species that have different needs. There are species that do have different needs, like abdominalis, have to have cooler
Well, when I
temperatures.
started, it wasn't that. I was mixing back 15, 18 years ago. I was mixing ones then that were similar. And see, the most common ones I had red eye, Augustus, and the barbs. Um, yeah, those three were the ones that basically I was trying to mix back then, and I ended up I lost them.
See, yeah, there's just so many stories of that happening, and it makes me so sad too when we're talking about species because Seahorse World, I did see the announcement. We were Dan and I were able to talk to Chris from Seahorse World, Seahorse Australia last week after the stream, and saw the announcement today where they had to basically shut the doors until this virus stuff is over, which makes me so sad because Chris was on the verge with some very unique and fun species, and hopefully it'll still come true. We're still hoping, fingers crossed. But one other thing, Dan, were you gonna say something? I thought I heard you.
No, ma'am.
Okay. One
No,
other
ma'am.
thing is I did neglect to mention when we were talking about the media and the filter, um, it was in regards to a dwarf seahorse tank. Was another question. So does that how do you handle media in a dwarf seahorse tank? And I don't know the answers exactly to that because you guys I don't do dwarfs. So
I've never used a media in a dwarf tank.
do you
I
just
didn't
do
see the
water
point of
changes?
it. The tank is so damn small. It's so easy to change larger volumes. I just I would never have thought of using media in a dwarf.
I,
Anyway, I'll
I,
put mute now and run feed the seahorses.
Sure. Thank you, Ray.
I use the same filtration scheme in a dwarf tank as I do any other system. Um, in fact, if I was to set up a display for dwarfs and get away from being a professional breeder, I'd probably have a 5-gallon tank with a 20-gallon sump with all my other stuff that I normally have.
Right. Gotcha. And how did I was gonna give one more answer based on Lucy because the video was based on Lucy's dwarf seahorse tanks, and I have a pretty good inkling of what she did. But Dan, when you're talking about setting up a 5 gallon seahorse tank, or did you say five? I think with 20 gallons. What did you say?
Yep.
5 and 20. Okay.
At
Um,
five, which, yep.
okay. What would happen as far as how does the live foods, the artemia, affect that? I just feel like that would be very affected by
Sure.
that. What?
Well, it's very easy. What you do is on the return pump is you put a ball valve on the Y so that during the feeding periods, you just turn the ball valve so the water's recirculating in the sump, or mostly circulating in the sump and just trickling in the tank. And then
Oh,
once you're done
okay.
with feeding, you open up the ball valve and now you flush the tank and the filter sock will catch all the uneaten artemia.
Would you? I mean, that kind of seems to me like you'd have to clean the filter sock a lot more. But that, I mean, that's about it.
Well, it's just a matter of taking the filter sock off and swapping it and rinsing it. And, I mean, it's real simple.
And also the waste of food. If you just set that up, last question on this, if you set that system up, how long of a feeding period would you allow them? Because considering that they kind of go on.
Well, when we did it, we were doing it on a different scale. We
Sure.
were doing a 60-gallon tank, and we would essentially have the water trickling in through the 12-hour light period or 14-hour light period, whatever we were doing at the time. And once we were done feeding for the day, once, as we siphon the tank for the evening, we would then turn the flows back up.
Okay, so you're not
So,
talking about a 10-minute feeding period. You're talking about trickle in and feeding period all day, and then at night
yes.
to switch it. Okay, just to clarify, because that makes a lot more sense. And just to let you know, in the video, it was Lucy's tank that we were discussing in the video, and she used some really cool filters that I think she got from France or somewhere, but they were very similar to ones we have here with the sponges. So she's using the sponges for the biological and a little bit of the mechanical, and then the kind she had an inner chamber, and in that chamber, I think, I'm not sure if she ever used carbon. We can ask her for sure. I'll definitely hit her up before next week. But I know she used a lot of floss. Again, that was the mechanical, and then the bacteria or the biological was the sponges. And so she would just not change the sponges as often as everything else. I'm not sure how that worked out very well with the artemia. I do know that in addition to those filtration methods, she used, her hand and siphoned, any she siphoned a lot. Let's put it that way. So when you use an enclosed tank like that without a sump, without any way to whatever, you got to do the water changes. Is the bottom line. You're gonna have to get the any dead artemia off the floor, that kind of thing. So, but I'll hit Lucy up trying to get some answers about her specific tank before next week. All right. So Dan, if you're wearing down, anytime we got a call, just let me know. And I'm just looking for. I was trying to switch back and forth between the questions. Were there any more in the stream? Not yet. Okay. There's a DIY, Rob's, there's options for DIY sponge filters that have media in them for dwarfs. Right. Yeah, and that's, I know what Lucy was using. I just want to ask her because I don't want to say that I knew what she was using and I'd be wrong. So I'll get more information by next week. And yes, addictions. Amen, sister. Okay. Does a dragon face pipefish need another one in the tank? From Patricia Miller. Dan, I don't keep pipefish. Any thoughts?
I've known many people who've kept one dragon pipefish in the tank. I think it would probably be more interesting having two, but I do know many people who've kept one successfully.
Yeah, I was going to ask too because I've seen a lot of people keep pipefish in reef tanks.
Yes.
And why is that different, do you think?
Well, because pipefish generally don't hitch to everything.
So they don't hitch. They're also typically wild caught. So I know there's a lot of options now for captive bred, but in the past they've typically been wild caught. So they're not going to have the same problems with other fish that maybe seahorses might, even though they're part of that family. And
Well, they're
anything
part of
else?
they're part of that family, but if you watch them, they typically can move faster than seahorses. They generally stay in the water column, and they're not hitching to the corals, so they're not as subject to having
Right.
issues with the stings like the seahorses do.
Right. But if you do obviously you do happen to have um, a dragon face pipefish, if you already have this in your tank and you're looking at adding another one, we'd love to see the tank, Patricia. So please share for sure and let us know how things go. All right. Let me see what other questions I got from the past. Um, let's see. I have a lot of particular ones. Okay, one question that I really need your help on, Dan, is we talk a lot about, like a seahorse flicking and what that could mean, and the yawning and what that could mean. But how about twitching? And the basic question is, if your seahorse is twitching, should you immediately think it's a problem, and where would you go from there? And did that make sense? Trying to combine two
Well,
questions into one. Sorry, go on.
well, the first thing with any issue with a seahorse that I recommend is to check all your parameters. You know, look at your temperature, look at your ammonia, your nitrates, your pH, and all that stuff, and then look very carefully. Are there any type of environmental issues, and are all the seahorses doing it, or one? If it's just one, then my recommendation at that point, assuming everything else is fine, is to isolate into a quarantine tank and observe and see if that continues. And if it does, then now it's a matter of process of elimination and
Mm-hmm.
trying to deal with what we can deal with. Um, the exact cause can be many different things, and the first step, I guess, would go at that point would be a freshwater dip, and if that doesn't cure it, then it's guessing by golly whether or not it's a parasitic issue or whether it's something else going on, and it's going to be trying to make the decision of whether you go with some type of a anti-parasitic drug or with an antibacterial.
So, okay, my initial answer to that question would be first of all, to point out that seahorses are kind of hard, because I was absolutely convinced there was something wrong with one of my female seahorses, and then I saw the cording a few weeks later, and I know nobody else has actually seen this in as much detail as I have, but I'm telling you, she was making eggs, or she was moody for some reason, like a female. I don't know, but I'm convinced. And either way, there was nothing wrong with her. Once she courted and did the egg thing, she was fine. So a lot of times when a seahorse is down in the corner, or does something once, you're kind of like, if you're like me and so attached to them and watching them constantly, you can jump to conclusions that are wrong. So definitely observe before doing anything. But then, as Dan said, the easiest thing is, if it's one, to isolate the seahorse and go from there. And I just want to read the question in a little more fine tune, because she mentions, she says, I have a seahorse. This is sorry, Michael Whitehead. I have a seahorse, not sure what kind, but she was fine when I got it. He was shy at first, then got comfortable. He ate fine and swam sometimes. Recently, he hasn't been eating, kind of twitching, and is just sitting on the bottom or floating to the top. What do I do? And before I let Dan take it off, I just want to say that, what was I going to say? The first thing is, we need a little bit more information, would be my answer. Like, has anything else been added to the tank since things went kind of south? And my first line of defense is, go to Seahorse Sources group, or come here when we're all here, and ask, because it's, when you get a comment, I'm trying to answer it now, but it's really hard without more details. So when we can back and forth, like in a phone call to Dan or here, then we can get more information and answer. All right, sorry, go Dan.
I couldn't begin to tell you exactly, because there isn't enough information to answer, but the description is not good. Um,
I was
at least
curious about the float to
as I
top. Sorry.
yeah, as I imagine what he's saying, and you got to remember, I'm trying to mentally picture somebody else's words, and that's the problem when you don't have the opportunity to ask questions to get a better picture. Um, Ideally, I'd like to see a video of it and a picture of the seahorse and the tank. Um, but the description of it just kind of hanging out on the bottom or then just kind of floating on the surface, it sounds like the seahorse in general is not feeling very good, and this needs to be addressed.
Sure. So hopefully, I'm going to go back and actually answer the question via typing fingers, but, come in sometime during Wine Wednesday or come to Seahorse Sources group. Even if Dan's not available because he's still under the weather, Cheryl and Lisa and Lucy and the other people in there are fantastic at answering these questions. So,
You got to remember too that when somebody says twitch, you have to really understand what they're really saying, because it that can be a description of so many different things, and it could be something very simple and it could be something very bad. Um, I hate to give a general. There's no
sure.
way for me to give a general. This is what you should do for this type of an ailment.
Sure. Okay. No, I totally agree. And okay, well, most of the other questions are about the website, which I'm still working on, and then macro. So I'm going to go to the other. Yeah, I think that's unless I find more, we'll do another one of these where we cover old questions. And are there any more questions? Is there anything you guys wanted to cover, Ray or Dan? And Kim Wilson, that's right. Twitching could be a lot of things and etc. Robs, thanks for coming. We will see you next week. Moi, we can't say wait to see your aquariums. But was there anything else you guys wanted to cover or anything else you can think of that we haven't?
Nope, not for me unless somebody wants to come and clean my tank out.
Ray, if I was close enough, I would. I mean, you'd have to stand
I've
six
heard
feet
that
away
line.
though. What?
I've heard that line before.
Oh, I know. Uh, That's Dan. Do you have back to just you specifically? You are you? Do you have? I mean, your daughter's there, right? You have help, right now?
I just need somebody to bring a shovel and dig a big hole for me.
No, don't even say that. Not funny. Not funny. Ugh. Unless you mean to bury the neighbor. No, I'm just kidding. Uh, hey, and you know what? When we were talking, I neglected to mention one thing I'd love to close on is do you happen to remember, if not, I'm making a fool of myself. Do you happen to remember, because Abby was the one that I actually quoted in my video, her comment about flow was just excellent about how it's so important to have it be mixed. Do you remember what that was? Do you remember her quote?
Well, well, what she was trying to differentiate, and I'm trying to remember the exact verbiage, because one of the guys, I can't think of his name at the moment, but one of the guys from the public aquariums tried to rip her apart over it, if you'll remember. Um, she was talking about turnover ratio. You wanted good flow, but not strong current, something to that effect.
Sure.
It needs to be broken up, and I forget the exact verbiage, but she used to give out the advice you wanted roughly the volume of the tank turned over 10 times in an hour, um, but you wanted it to be um,
Mixed.
diverse and
Right.
broken up, not a strong jet stream going across the tank. But I can't remember the exact verbiage she used to say, but there was one little sentence she had put together that covered it.
I know. I'm gonna have to look it up and quote it in the comments when we're done. But yeah, and that's kind of what I kind of actually quoted her in the video. Basically saying, and that's kind of what I was getting to when I talked about the flow on the side and using two instead of one at lower speeds. I really like covered power heads that are adjustable, because then if it is too strong, you can adjust it down or whatever. But um, everybody talks about how they need more flow because of keeping the tank, the aquarium clean, and etc. And I've just seen so many cases in which they just love it, and it does depend on the species and etc. But my seahorses dance in the flow constantly, and just I can't imagine. In the video, I actually show the difference of them just sitting there, not doing much, hiding around, and then when I added flow, it was a different story completely. And Abby's comment, which I'm going to look up, was basically that, the turnover needs to be this, but you need to divide that by using the pump and the sump and the power heads in the aquarium or whatever method you use. So anyhow, I'll look it up, guys. But all right, well, I'm gonna call it for tonight since you know, I think Dan. I don't think Dan's 6 feet away. I'm feeling a little. No, I'm kidding. I hope you get better, though. I really do. I worry like crazy. So everybody, say prayers, and we thank you so much for coming, even though you don't feel well, Dan. We really appreciate it. So all right, you guys say bye.
Everybody
Goodbye.
stay
Have a good
safe.
night, everyone.
Happy Wine
Stay
Wednesday,
healthy.
guys. Stay healthy for sure. Cheers.